broadcasted live. Catch the podcast on kaya959.co.za.
To help us understand this from a governance point of view and get clarity, on the line we're joined by the CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa, Professor Parmi Natesan. Professor Natesan, always good to touch base with you on such critical issues impacting South Africa's economy. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Gugulethu. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you as always. This one can be quite a complex conversation, but I guess let's zone it into the concerns around governance issues. Help us understand this context regarding the delays of a leadership appointment at Eskom and what it does do for the trust deficit that already exists in the market.
Sure. So I think news reports just last week were indicating that Minister Gordhan had declined the name submitted by the board for the position of CEO at Eskom, citing that the board should have proposed 3 names from which he would have then chosen in terms of Eskom's Memorandum of Incorporation. And it's quite common in the legislation at these SOEs that the minister, being government representative, appoints the CEOs. But from a general governance perspective, where it doesn't fit well is that generally you have shareholders, and in this instance it being government, they appoint a board of directors. And they then allow that board of directors to fulfill their legal duties towards acting in the best interest of the organization. And one of the duties of that board of directors is to appoint a CEO, because the board of directors oversees the operations of the entity, effectively oversees the CEO and his or her management team.
Yep.
Therefore, it becomes very difficult and complex when the shareholder wants to appoint the board, which is correct, but then the shareholder also wants to appoint the CEO, who then has to report into the board. And we've seen various challenges with this. I mean, firstly, the board may not have trust and confidence in the individual that has been appointed by the minister, but they just have to work with this individual. It may not be the person that the board considers may be the best person for the job in the best interest of the organization. And the other way around, from the CEO's perspective as well, we've seen issues where the CEOs sometimes feel more accountable to the minister who appointed them than to their actual board, who are overseeing their performance and overseeing the performance of the organization.
And this does raise significant concerns, as you say, because typically that's not how the pressure or the structure or the appointment should be administered, where the shareholder is so actively involved. Help us understand if the rules and regulations in terms of the South African landscape are the same for private entities and SOEs, especially if we have to make reference to the King Code.
So the legislation for private entities is very different to legislation for the public sector in our country. In most private sector organizations, in terms of our Companies Act and also how King 4 addresses the governance structure, the shareholders appoint the board, so the non-executive directors of the board, and then the board members appoint the executives, one of which is the CEO. I think the public sector is unique in these SOEs in that the legislation and the way their memorandums of incorporation were drafted, it gives the shareholder power to also appoint the executives, which we've raised as a concern for a number of years, because we believe that there's a lack of role clarity as a result of this.
Given that you've raised these concerns, have they been falling on deaf ears?
Look, it's hard to tell because the legislation and the practice hasn't changed. And I mean, we saw it as soon as just last week that the minister wasn't happy with the candidate that was nominated by the board. I guess for us as the public, the challenge is we're sitting back and seeing the challenges that the organization is facing, and we need trust in the board and trust in the executive that this organization is going to turn around and be successful, which makes it more and more difficult to see delays in the process. I'm sure the board would have really considered the candidates, applied their mind as to who they thought was best and fit for purpose for the job. And the minister's rejection of it makes one wonder around political influence over competence of people.
You're quite right. This does remind me of concerns that in a letter that was once published by the former CEO of SAA, Vuyani Chahana, who had also highlighted just the levels of bureaucracy and lack of flexibility in terms of having a relationship with the board, but still having to go back to the shareholder, being government, who would then also be involved in operational inefficiencies. This is clearly a major concern, and as you've said, has been brought to the table before in order to address it adequately. Is there a way of fixing things, I guess, and again being mindful of not getting tangled in this governance issue which continues to remain?
Look, I think the way to fix it is to relook at the legislative framework governing our SOEs. So to look at how appointments are made. I mean, in the first place, besides for the CEO, even for board members, we're not clear on the process that's followed in these SOEs to appoint directors. What requirements are being looked at? Are candidates being vetted properly? Are they being interviewed? Do they have the necessary knowledge, skills, and ability to serve as non-executive directors and add value to that organization? We're never sure. And then one step further now with appointment of executives and the key executive being the CEO in this instance, are the right people being appointed for the right reasons, I guess is the question.
I guess that means that we all need to ask for full clarity and disclosure then.
Absolutely.
100%. It's such a pleasure speaking to you, Professor Natesan, and you've given us a lot more clarity and perspective as to what we should be calling for and asking for, which is transparency and independence of the board in order to make adequate appointments to the executive team. I guess this just further delays the operational efficiencies at Eskom and further erodes any trust and governance controls in the organization, given the leadership deficit.
Certainly. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's Professor Parmi Natesan, who's the CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa.
If you missed it live, catch the podcast on kaya959.co.za.